Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 17th of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information from the National Weather Service. No matter what part of Alaska you're in, you can find that weather information online at weather.gov/Alaska. On our website, you'll find tools to use a more text-friendly or mobile-friendly version there. If you've got poor cell service and or don't have a really fast internet signal, no problem. You can get that information and save it on your phone. The next time you go back home, you'll be able to get those links and use the faster service there that's downscaled to the type of internet speeds that you're used to where you are. If you need those links, send me an email. I'd be happy to provide them anytime at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. You can always call the weather info line as well, 800-472-0391. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and you'll see out over the open waters of the Gulf, a ridge of high pressure still in charge of a large part of the eastern Gulf. However, it's starting to weaken, and that's allowing low pressure to fill in more and more real estate out across the central and western Gulf waters. You can also see a smaller scale circulation that's located down to the south. The main player will be the low pressure system out across the Alaska Peninsula that's bringing rainfall more and more into south and western sections of the region there. As we go ahead in time, you'll notice that most of the interior again has been looking at partly to mostly cloudy conditions, but as you look up to the north a little bit more, watch the clouds filling in. As we get into the Wednesday images here, you'll notice clouds spreading out across the northern slope. Areas of fog have been pretty dense around Barrow today and out across the central and western Bering Sea. A little bit more clearing underneath a brief region of high pressure. The low pressure system spread north and east today, bringing rainfall out across southwestern Alaska and gradually filling in more parts of the sky across south central. Most of what we've seen for the Kenai Peninsula and into the Anchorage region and the Matanuska-Susitna valleys has not been terribly heavy at this point. The main focus of the moisture will be out toward Yakutat, where periods of rainfall should start to pick up over the next couple days, and this is gradually going to creep over into northern parts of southeast. Notice where that ridge of high pressure has hung out, at least for today and probably into tomorrow. Still holding over the central and southern parts of the panhandle, and this moisture is going to start creeping its way over a little bit more as we get toward the end of the week. So this wave of weather here really focusing on the Prince William Sound region and eventually into northern and central parts of southeast. Across the north, clouds have been filling in. We've got a stationary boundary lingering right across the Brooks Range, and as a result of that, the main jet stream there is keeping weather focused right along that boundary. We've got a circulation of low pressure here across eastern Asia, and it's filling in the western Bering with warmer air. You'll see freezing levels there climbing to about 12, even 14,000 feet. So a lot of warmth building out to the west. But behind that is cooler air, and we'll see what happens here as we get into Friday and Saturday with more of a northerly push, it looks like. That could bring some of those pieces of brash ice closer to the coast. Here's a look at the weather chart today. Low pressure sitting just east of Kodiak Island and south of Resurrection Bay at 1,022 millibars. High pressure's been in charge of most of the Gulf through the good chunk of the afternoon. 1,030 millibars there on the northern end of the Gulf, a little bit stronger as you head further southward. And then our circulation south and west of Sandpoint sitting right at an even 1,000 millibars. Low pressure to the east, wrapping around the occlusion. all the way to the southern Bering and out toward the central Aleutians. Not a whole lot of rain there. The back side of the system is really pretty dry. Probably be some stronger wind gusts working through the central and eastern chain today. You'll probably just call it a light breeze. High pressure west of the Pribilofs at 1,025 millibars is locked in. A lot of low clouds there, but really not a whole lot underneath that at all. Maybe some intermittent fog or mist. Here's our boundary sitting across the north, very close to Barrow, and again, that's locked in a lot of low clouds and poor visibility from time to time today. High pressure to the east of that will weaken, allowing the next wave of cooler weather to try and drop southward. You'll see winds and rain start to build in across the Bering Strait up to the Chukchi coast. And because of those winds, and especially for coastlines looking at a southwesterly direction, you're probably going to see some higher than usual surf along those regions. So keep that in mind if you've got some fishing to do or if you've got things sitting along the coast, and especially if you're a southwest facing coast, you're probably going to be dealing with some higher surf over the next couple days. No advisories or warnings just yet, but keep it in mind the surf could be a little rougher than normal. Out across the eastern interior, a few showers are expected there. High pressure is going to try and build in across Prince William Sound. That will keep the amount of rain down a little bit, but there's still going to be some showers in the region, and a lot of that still focusing on low pressure working across the Alaska Peninsula. Our main push of wet weather working across the Gulf is going to throw on the brakes. Remember, we still have our ridge of high pressure sitting out across the central and southern parts of the Panhandle, so this will sit tight. And then high pressure builds in out across the central chain. We're going to see this play out over and over again. Fast moving zone of low pressure, high pressure, then another round of low pressure. The main focus is going to be up north, and then whatever happens here across the Gulf with that southerly flow developing. Here's what happens on Thursday. The system across the eastern Gulf weakens, but the focus for wet weather continues to stream in that same general direction. That means wet weather is going to build in, and it could stay there for a little while as we get into Thursday and Friday, because our ridge is still anchored in place. Low pressure is trying to creep its way into Bristol Bay, really not going very quickly at all because this weather system won't get out of the way and that one won't get out of the way. So here's where we are. Showers continue across the peninsula, Bristol Bay, all the way up through the southwest Capes and the YK Delta. You'll see them continue across parts of the western Kenai, or the eastern Kenai Peninsula and western Prince William Sound. And we'll even have an opportunity for a few showers and storms across Eagle and southward toward Northway. Most of the interior looks relatively dry, but we're going to start keeping an eye out on the western Brooks Range there for the Kobuk and Noatak valleys. You'll notice that boundary really hasn't changed too much in the last couple days, and the upper level forcing, or the energy brought along from the jet stream moving over that layer of very wet air and not moving air, could create some heavier precipitation, especially over the mountains. And those mountain streams will respond with areas of higher than usual water. So what does that mean for you? If you're in the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, the lower parts or the upper parts, or you've got travel plans that take you up into the mountains, make sure you're watching the weather and know what rivers and streams you're crossing, because not only is it going to be wet, but there could be a potential for some heavier rainfall. And if all those things happen, some places there could experience some flooding, and that could cause some problems there if you're along the Kobuk or Noatak Valley region. So keep that in mind, be safe, and remember the flood safety rules that are simply turn around, don't drown. If your trail or road crosses an area that has flooding on it and the water's moving, go a different way. You might have to wait a while too for that water to recede. Just be careful, and remember, it really doesn't take a whole lot of water to change your life there if you're not prepared for that. Out across the west, remember I said there was warm air moving across the Bering. Here it comes, and this is all forcing that wet weather northward across the Seward Peninsula, the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, and it's a little more showery here across southwestern and south central Alaska as we get into Friday, and the central and northern parts of southeast still looking at continued chances for rainfall there as we get into Friday afternoon. The boundary there focusing rain and cool weather and poor visibility at times across the north slope as we head toward the end of the week. Here's a look at temps today. 50s, 60s, even 70s there for some of the inside passages there. Pretty nice. Lower to mid 70s for many locations. 61 around Sitka, 64 closer to the capital city, 59 in Cordova, 57 in Valdez, lower 60s around the Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet, 70 around Talkeetna, 71 as we look at Northway, 60s there for Eagle today, 72 in Fairbanks, 70 in Fort Yukon up north. Temps were cool just on the other side of that frontal boundary. We saw readings only in the upper 40s today. 56 in AKwx, for example, and 44 in Barrow, 52 in Wainwright, down into Kotzebue Sound. Temps were in the 60s, even 70s in some locations. Shishmaref at 64, 53 in Nome, 70 around Unalakleet. It was 71 in Galena, 73 in McGrath. Temps in the upper 60s around Bethel this afternoon. Savunga showed 52 by 3 o'clock. As you get into Bristol Bay, 50s and 60s there. About the same there for Kodiak Island. A little bit of wet weather moving through your neck of the woods today. 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint had 57. About the same there in St. Paul and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. And we saw temps in the low to mid 50s for Adak and Atka, with Shemya showing 48. On to low temps tonight, you're looking at 50s for really a large part of the state. 40s and 50s for southeast and south central, Prince William Sound, the Copper River Basin, the interior. Also running, kind of getting a taste of fall there with upper 40s to low 50s. Fort Yukon at 52, 10 degrees colder in Barrow. Kivalina showing 49, 51 at Shishmaref, low 50s for Nome, and southwest looking at temperatures in the lower 50s. Some of the warmest weather out there around Bristol Bay in the mid 50s. St. Paul, you're looking at 50 degrees. Anchorage, low 50s with highs tomorrow. Back in the mid 60s for many. The interior, of course, the warmest in the lower 70s as we head into the end of summer and early fall. Lower 70s for you, 70 for Yukon. Southeast, expect temperatures anywhere from the upper 50s where it's raining to the lower 70s where it's not. Prince William Sound in the mid 60s. Kodiak looking at 61. The Pribilovs in the mid 50s on Alaska and Dutch Harbor. Upper 50s for you and most of the Aleutians. Bristol Bay lower to mid 60s. Looks like Amonic and many around Bethel back in the mid 60s tomorrow afternoon. 59 in Nome, and again upper 40s to nearly 50 degrees for many across the North Slope. Cooler along the Chukchi coast. Flying weather there shows IFR conditions to start along St. Lawrence Island, around the central and eastern chain, Prince William Sound, and offshore of most of southeastern Alaska by the afternoon. That improves for many, but as you can see, that wetter weather starts to drop visibilities across regions from Sitka southward along the outer coast. From Kodiak Island all the way out towards Sand Point and west through Unamak Pass and also to Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Expect IFR in the afternoon. And from the western parts of the Beaufort Seacoast, Point Barrow, all the way down the Chukchi Coast, St. Lawrence Island, and the western chain. IFR is expected there, and again, plan for some rain up north. Your flying weather in the interior, though, and most passes probably will be relatively good. VFR conditions there for Anaktuvik and Hannigan Pass as we head through your daytime tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass also looking at improvements as we go through Thursday. Rainy Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions developing throughout the day. Windy Pass, expect VFR. Isabel Pass looks pretty good at this point, so plan to sail smoothly that direction and through Mentasta Pass. VFR conditions there for Tanita Pass as we get through Thursday. And Portage Pass expecting to start at IFR, of course, with rain in the Sound, and MVFR conditions will develop as we go. Chilkoot and White Pass also expecting to see MVFR conditions there. All right, all that warm air out west has brought 14,000-foot freezing levels out to the western Bering, so a sign of the warmer air that's trying to move eastward. We still have cold air and a ridge of high pressure in charge of south central and southwestern Alaska. And then here's our other ridge that's not getting out of the way just yet, anywhere from 10 to 14,000-foot levels for southeastern Alaska. Freezing levels down to 8,000 feet across the North Slope for tomorrow. Icing potential is there, generally above 7,000 to 8,000 feet for areas around the North Slope out toward the Bering Strait. Again, this is all following that moisture plume that's made its way up north and the low pressure system that's moving into it from eastern Asia. From about 8,000 feet around the Alaska Range, I should say, into the Yukon and northern parts of British Columbia and around the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain. Anywhere above 8,000 feet, you could run into some light to isolated moderate icing potential there. Two factors are controlling our weather right now. If you could find the weather conveyor belt, you would find one up north, working out of eastern Asia and over the Arctic coast at around 90 knots, moving generally west to east. We have a ridge of high pressure across the western Pacific. And again, that's going to gradually bring up more tropical moisture with more tropical systems developing way out here. And that right now is going to drop into more of a northerly flow coming out of the Bering, but that southwesterly flow is what's bringing the wet weather back to southeastern Alaska, kind of giving south central a little bit of a glancing blow at this point. At 9,000 feet, you can see our broad west and southwesterly winds coming across the Gulf, anywhere from about 30 to 35 knots. The winds are fairly light across the interior, but once you get to the Brooks Range, we're in a stronger westerly flow, and along the coast, that could be as strong as 40 knots. West and northwesterly winds light over the Bering at about 10 to 25 knots. At 3,000 feet, you can see those stronger winds are hitting the Chukchi coast at 45 to 50 knots coming in from the west. Similar pattern across the Gulf and over the interior. Wind speeds typically from 20 to about 25 knots. Wind speeds are considerably lighter here across the central and western Bering, around 10 to 15 knots. So areas of turbulence to focus on tomorrow would be from Kotzebue Sound along the north slopes of the Brooks Range and the Western Range, all the way up to the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast below 4,000 feet, and also across the central and western parts of the Aleutians. Look for light isolated chop there. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a sea ice update and your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Become familiar with the correct use and adjustment of your lap belt and shoulder harness. Adjust the lap belt so that it rests snugly across your hips, and then adjust your shoulder harness so that it is also snug. But make sure that the shoulder harness does not lift the lap belt from its proper position. If a single shoulder harness is used, it should extend across the torso for maximum effectiveness. In the case of emergency, the proper position for all occupants in the helicopter is the full upright position against the seat back. You should also become familiar with the aircraft intercom systems, or ICS, for use during flight. You will need to note the location of the fire extinguisher, the ELT, or emergency locator transmitter, the first aid kit, and extra survival gear. The location of these items will vary with different helicopter makes, as will the seatbelt mechanisms and door latches. Always get a thorough safety briefing for the type of aircraft that you are flying in. And if there is anything that you are unfamiliar with, please ask the helicopter manager before continuing your project or flight. During flight, the pilot is in charge of the aircraft and will give any instructions that you might need in case of an emergency. During the flight, you will be able to speak to the pilot or other passengers over the intercom system. But when the pilot or helicopter manager are making radio calls or during takeoff and landing, passengers should refrain from using the intercom system. Always make sure that all your personal items are secure in the cabin and clear from the controls and instrument panel. Also watch for any flight hazards, such as other aircraft, birds, or ground hazards while in flight. Never assume that a hazard has been seen by the pilot. It is the job of the pilot and helicopter manager to determine the suitability of a landing site. However, you will probably take an active role in selecting areas and preparing landing sites. These off-site landing areas pose one of the greatest risks in helicopter operations due to the variable hazards involved. There are 4 factors involved in selecting a landing area. The first consideration is the size of the landing zone. Make sure that the landing zone and touchdown area are adequate for the model of helicopter you're using. Second, the landing area needs to be level with a clear approach and departure path. This path should allow passengers to board and depart the helicopter on the downhill slope in full view of the pilot. The third factor is the helicopter approach and departure path. There needs to be adequate clearance from obstacles for the helicopter to make a normal approach and departure from the landing zone while considering expected winds. The fourth factor is wind direction. The helicopter approach and landing should be into the wind. It's a good idea to tie pieces of flagging to small trees or shrubs near the landing area. This will give an indication of wind direction to the pilot on approach. You can also give a radio call to the crew with this information and let the pilot know if there are gusty or erratic winds. Remember to stand at the upwind side of the landing area with your back to the wind as a final reference for the pilot. Most off-site landing areas need some improvements to eliminate obstructions. The helicopter manager is trained to use chainsaws and can clear unimproved areas to meet agency guidelines. It's a good idea to keep the forest helicopter specialist and managers informed about future work sites that may need landing area improvements. Sites needing only minimal work can be improved by crews using hand tools. Special operations cover a wide variety of missions. Your involvement with the planning and performance of the job are very important. The helicopter manager will let you know what duties you will perform. It is important to remember in sling operations that only qualified aviation personnel will attach and unhook loads. For your own safety, plan for the unexpected. If bad weather comes in suddenly, you may have to choose an alternate pickup site. In this case, you may have to improve the site and guide the aircraft to your location. You can help the aircrew find your location by using your radio and giving your position in relation to the helicopter. You can do this by simply using the 12-hour clock technique. In this example, you would tell the pilot that you are at 9 o'clock. And wearing the highly visible orange flight suit will also help the aircrew find you easily. Your forest helicopter staff is making every effort to provide you with the safest and most efficient resource to help you meet your transportation needs. You can help us by becoming an active participant in the Region Aviation Safety Program. You can work with air crews in the planning process and provide options to allow for changing weather conditions. Have a plan for alternate projects so that bad weather won't spoil your day. By taking responsibility for your own safety and survival needs, your efforts will prevent incidents and prepare you for the unexpected.
Time for a quick check of today's sea ice edge, and in the white areas is concentration of ice above 80%, the blue areas between about 20 and 80%. You can see there is still ice around Barrow all the way out toward Wainwright here in navigational waters. South and west of Wainwright along the Chukchi coast, the water becomes open at this point, and there's still ice along the Beaufort Sea coast, but generally offshore. And next time you want to check on ice conditions or the forecast for the next 5 days, as well as sea surface temperatures, head to the Alaska Sea Ice Program's webpage at weather.gov/anchorage/ice. On the inside waters tomorrow in southeast, look for a southeasterly flow coming into the Lynn Canal and between 15 to as high as 35 knots with seas in the Lynn Canal at 7 feet. Around the Clarence Strait, northwesterlies at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. And winds along the outer coast coming in from the west and southwest, south of Sitka, more of a south and southwesterly flow north of Cross Sound and Gustavus into Yakutat and Cape Fairweather and Icy Cape. With higher gusts, they're still possible. The winds have come down, as we were talking about yesterday, 25 knots with an 8-foot sea. By Friday, more of a southeasterly flow coming up the northern coast, 8-foot seas there on a 20 to 25 knot wind. Southerlies inside of Lynn Canal diminished to about 20 knots, and northwesterlies in Clarence Strait and toward the Dixon entrance running around 15 knots with a 3-foot sea on the inside and 7-foot seas on the outside. For South Central, things are going to settle down as we get into Friday. Look for a variable and light wind inside of Prince William Sound. That should not change going into Friday. Southerlies in the northern part of Cook Inlet, 2-foot seas. Those will diminish tomorrow. Easterlies inside of Shelikof Strait with a 15-knot wind and 3-foot seas, and southerlies on the east side of Kodiak Island at 20 knots. All of that settles down as we get into Friday, as southeasterly wind is probably going to be the strongest part outside of Montague Island, And the northern part of the Gulf, 15 knots with a 7-foot sea, otherwise 6-foot seas in the western Gulf, and 1 to 2, even 3-foot seas west of the Barrens. About as good as we can do inside of Cook Inlet and down into Shelikof Strait for Friday. For Bristol Bay, easterlies, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea, 9-foot seas along the Pacific coast with a southerly wind at 20 knots, and light and variable winds down the Bering Sea coast for Thursday. That won't change there, but inside of Bristol Bay, look for a southeasterly flow at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, southwesterlies along the Pacific coast with 15 knots and a 6-foot sea there as we wrap up the week. For the Aleutians, north and westerly winds along the Pacific coast, 15 to 20 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea, 6 to 7-foot seas along the Bering Sea coast there at 10 to 15. And you're looking at 4-foot seas there from Kiska to Attu and eastward a little bit, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea on Thursday, becoming a stronger westerly flow on Friday, 5 to 7-foot seas, west and southwesterly winds rounding the ridge anchored across the northern Pacific with 3 to 4-foot seas there, northwesterlies at 15 knots crossing Nikolsky and Alaska with 4 to 5-foot seas expected to wrap up the week. For the west coast, stronger winds across St. Lawrence Island, 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. Light and variable winds out across areas north of Nunivak Island to St. Matthew, and an east and northerly flow coming out of the Kuskokwim Delta to the Pribilofs, 15 to 20 there with a 5-foot sea on Thursday, dropping to 2 to 3 feet on Friday with a west and southerly wind developing, stronger southwesterlies across the northern Bering with winds as high as 25 knots and seas as high as 6 feet. And across the North Slope, stronger, persistent southwesterly flow on Thursday. Again, southwest-facing coasts, especially there from Point Hope down toward Kivalina, probably looking at some higher than normal surf, so be mindful of that. 25 to 30 knots with seas as high as 7 to 8 feet. As we get into Friday, a change, an easterly wind wrapping into the next weather system. Here's some northerly winds coming in. That may push some ice closer to the coastline, and we'll watch and see how things develop as we get into Saturday and Sunday again following that next weather passage. Here's a recap of the weather to come. Rain showers are expected across south central and moving into northern parts of southeast. You'll see stronger southwesterly winds again across the North Slope as we head into tomorrow with the weather system parked in place there. That could also bring some heavier rainfall to the western and central Brooks Range. The Kobuk and Noatak valleys there should be mindful of potential flooding in your streams and rivers. So be careful when you cross them. You might not be able to get back. Take your time and be extra careful.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.